Spoiler warning, this video will spoil events through the end of Dungeon Crawler Carl Book 5, The Butcher's Masquerade. Hey nerds, what's up? So I know I literally just said on my last Dungeon Crawler Carl video that I wasn't gonna make any deep character analysis dives until I finished Book 7. Well, I'm a liar. I literally had so many feelings when I finished Book 5. I pulled out my notes app and just wrote a bunch of stuff. It says this was created at 9:30 p.m. And I just feel like I needed to talk about them right now. And I'm really just gonna be expanding what I talked about on my first DCC video about why I think this series works so well, except this time I'm gonna use specific examples of what I talked about from events that happened in the first 5 books. I want to dig in with those specific examples to exemplify why I think Matt Dinniman just nails emotionally heightened moments in a series that could easily have just stayed surface level and shallow. Specifically today, I want to talk about 3 elements I've really noticed in Dinniman's writing. The first being how Dinniman doesn't rush character development, how he leans into known tropes and then reverses them for maximum emotional impact, and also how he utilizes archetypes without falling into frustrating stereotypes. Now, these things I'm going to talk about are more about Dinniman's writing style and ability rather than like particular plot predictions. So I think I can make this video now after Book 5 and it will be kind of evergreen. I don't think these things will stop being true in the next couple books. That being said though, please, please, please be aware that I've only read through Book 5 right now. And so please do not spoil anything from Book 6 and 7 in the comments. I read a lot of my comments and I do not want to be spoiled even vaguely. So I just ask you to keep the discussion through the first 5 books. With that being said, I'll see you after the jump. So let's start off with how patient Dinniman is. He sets things up and then just does not mind taking his sweet time on caching those moments he set up in. And he specifically does this with character development. One thing I noticed in particular is how slowly he reveals Carl's past. Now, I don't know if I've complained about this publicly on here, but I know I've complained about it like in real life to my friends about books. One thing I've noticed a lot, and it's kind of related to like the subtlety thing, is that often I feel like authors can be in a rush to tell us everything they know about their character, and they don't let like the reader breathe and get to know the character slowly. They just get so excited to tell you everything and to tell you how deep their character really is and like look at all they've struggled in their past, and they just want to front load all that information, which doesn't leave a lot of room to discover things later in the book or even series. And I get it. When I was briefly considering writing, don't get excited, I gave up on it for several reasons. But when I was doing my writing, I found it was very difficult that I knew so much about my characters that I didn't want to reveal right away, but then I was somehow worried that I would lose my readers' interest if they didn't know anything right away. And I felt this pull about how difficult it is to hold back the things you know as an author for the right moment. And like that was as a complete amateur, just like playing around writing. And I think there's another motivation too that I explored a little bit in that video where I talked about a review of Fonda Lee's Greenbone saga, where this reviewer said they DNF'd after the first Wen chapter, which is one of the female characters, very early on in the book, because they felt that immediately she was bad female representation because of how she was represented in that chapter. And I talked about, which was so funny, is that Wen is one of my favorite female characters and her development is incredible. But yes, if you stop after her first chapter, you might not feel that way. And Lee expressed her frustration about that in some tweets. But I think there is this worry from authors that will happen if you set up a weak character who will grow, that readers might not give that character a chance. And now with the cycle online of social media, that can also negatively impact your book. Someone that came to mind to me that is great at the patience payoff is, of course, Martin in A Song of Ice and Fire. I was particularly thinking of Jaime Lannister, who we don't get to hear a viewpoint from until book 3, which is like 2,500 pages into a series, and how most readers' opinion vastly changes about him once we are in his head, because we get such a different vision of him through other people's viewpoints. And Martin does not care about that in any of his characters. He takes his sweet time letting you develop certain expectations of them and then changing them like I said, thousands of pages later. And I think that patience pays off in a big way with you really developing feelings for his characters because you are slowly getting to know them. Honestly, I feel like Dinniman similarly is just so great at being so patient about his character reveals. He does not care that we get a pretty surface level view of Carl in book 1 and just slowly reveals more information about his past as well as his relationship with Donut and Bee in every single book. Like, I think it is wild that in book 5 is when I am first finding out the information that, if I am understanding it correctly, he walked in on his mother's suicide. That is such a big deal. I'm guessing we're going to get more information about that, but as of right now, that is what I think has happened. That is a huge event that completely recontextualizes a lot of Carl's emotions and actions and thoughts about his past. And we've waited till book 5 to tell readers that. And it's such a cool development in viewing his past relationships and expanding him as a character so that we continually feel like we are getting to know him. There's also an unintended consequence of this that I think really benefits the book and series, and it actually came to mind because of a comment someone gave on my DCC video, basically saying the character arcs or the character development all feels earned, which is interesting because the characters really have relatively little time to change. Like, all of these floors are happening within either days or a couple weeks, and we're expecting our characters to go through big changes, and that might feel unrealistic, but it kind of works. And in my opinion, I think one of the reasons that this relatively fast turnaround is working so well in DCC is because of the slow reveal of the past. I think Dinniman is able to use reveals of the past as a way to develop his characters currently without having to rely on too quick character development in 2 weeks' time. I hope that makes sense the way I'm explaining that. It's that he's able to utilize things that have happened in Carl's past or Donut's past or whatever to change how we view them currently, even if they as a character aren't necessarily changing in the moment. The reader's perception of them has changed. Now, of course, there are other reasons that these characters can go through a faster character development. They are obviously under a lot of stress and in a very extreme situation. And I think in extreme situations, we can understand that people would change faster or on a different timeline than they would in real life. But I think that in conjunction with these slow reveals of the past, help us feel like there is more character movement, even though we are restricted by time. Does that make sense? And of course, a smaller side effect of this slow reveal is it also just mounts the horror. For example, in book 5, I was just so convinced that that river rushing in Carl's head had something to do with him constantly using that ring of divine suffering. I think that's what it's called. The ring, the killer ring. I've been so stressed about that, so stressed about what is going to happen. I know the shoe's going to drop about Carl using that ring. I thought it was this river, and then it ends up being this other horrific reveal. And Matt does nothing with the ring in book 5. Like, he's just using it and there has been no consequences. Do I 100% know that consequence is going to come due? Yes. Do I know when? No, because Matt is patient. He's in no rush to have that shoe drop. And because of that, I also think it helps the horror and anxiety. And I just overall think it's a skill that's difficult to have, and it really benefits the series. I'm calling this next section the reversal of known tropes because I don't know how else to succinctly explain it. But essentially, Dungeon Crawler Carl reminds me of a specific genre of media, particularly movies, where you just get a revel in a dude wrecking people. So, the movies that immediately came to mind were Taken with Liam Neeson and John Wick. And this is not an indictment of those movies. Trust me, as a teen, I watched Taken a million times. Those movies are so fun. And they leave you with this sense of yeah, get them, do it. You are watching that to see them succeed and just revel in the violence and the takedown that those characters are eliciting on everybody else in the movie. And I even think game-wise, it reminds me of Dungeons and Dragons, how parties are often known as murder hobos. Just you kind of go in and as a wizard, you fireball everyone and there's no really thought to any of those consequences. And that's fun. And it would be so easy for Dungeon Crawler Carl to be one of those things. We have that classic main character who is really strong and clever and could go in and just wreck people and does often. And I don't necessarily think that would be a bad thing. But it shocks me how much DCC is just not like that, and I think it particularly comes to a head in book 5. But it starts in book 3, right? We start with Carl kind of learning about how the NPCs come to be and then starting to care for the NPCs and starting to worry about them, when normally in a video game or a Dungeons & Dragons setting or what I'm talking about, these NPCs are expendable. And as Carl doesn't treat them as expendable, we as the readers start to not treat them as expendable. And instead, Dinniman starts to really explore like the horror of what they're doing with these NPCs. And I think that's just such a unique choice. I think it's not necessarily a choice that would be easily chosen, but I think it adds a lot to the story. Like, just when I start getting comfortable thinking I can hate a character, Dinniman just slaps you with the actual horror and tragedy of what's happening. And as I mentioned, book 5, I think that really happens with the hunters. Like, we have been building up that we are going to hate the hunters. They are the worst. Carl really dislikes them, obviously, and how unfair it is to the crawlers. And we obviously know some high-profile hunters that are just the worst. But as Carl goes and like interacts with these hunters and kills them, and all of a sudden is realizing these hunters are kind of in similar positions to him himself. Like, well, yeah, we are second-class citizens out there, and this is our only choice to feed our families. And I'm just an accountant, and I was forced to come here. And suddenly, as a reader, we're not allowed to just revel in it. Like, Dinniman is forcing us to treat every character as human. He's forcing us to confront the actual horror of what this situation would be, even if on the surface, it's like this funny thing that we are experiencing. And the dichotomy of that and the force of treating it realistically almost in that way and treating everybody as a person really brings the series an extra level, and I think is also what I'm talking about when I say the series gets so much bigger than what it is in book 1, is because of those elements. This Uno reversal, I think, just lends to the weight of the series. We have to confront the reality and horror of what is happening, grounding the series and giving it more emotional weight. Finally, let's talk about my last section, which is archetypes without stereotypes, which once again is just kind of like a simplified way of trying to get across what I mean for a nice little chapter title. And it's something that really impresses me about Dinniman's work, but it is kind of a hard topic to talk about, so I hope you will stick with me as I try to articulate the best I can, knowing that I might not always like say it perfectly. To start off, we make use of this kind of typical uber masculine prototype. Ex-Navy, super physically strong. And we also have this kind of archetypal shallow ex-girlfriend character in B, and then we have Donut, who is an image-obsessed, pop culture-obsessed female character. And it would just be so easy for this to fall into classic sexist tropes where femininity is mocked and ridiculed, and masculinity is only presented as aggressive and domineering and maybe take on like a womanizing quality, and it just literally never does. And sometimes it like boggles my mind how much clear care is put into those characters to avoid that. Like, yes, we obviously laugh at and are meant to laugh at some of Donut's sillier traits. They are funny, and yeah, like we're meant to laugh at it. But at the same time, Dinniman also uses the story to tell us that some of these qualities of Donut's are actually her biggest assets. I love how Carl is constantly realizing that Donut's ability to relate to almost anybody through a variety of topics and her genuine interest in the lives of other people actually becomes this insane asset for them, where Donut sincerely makes friends wherever she goes and is sincerely interested in keeping communication lines open with a variety of people. And she is responsible for bringing a lot of people to their side. Like, I even think of the silliness of how Donut and Zev's love for Gossip Girl is really the start of their relationship and friendship and what brings Zev to their side. In a way, Donut's complete willingness to find nothing shallow or stupid is how she relates to so many people, and it is treated as a skill. And I also think it ends up working as a great foil to B, who obviously we don't like very much right now. I will say this is the one thing that might change. It's clear from the end of book 4 that we're going to get to know B a little bit more. And I do think like I have some sympathy for her, but it's limited because I think she kind of sucks. But I like that the idea is B doesn't suck because of her interests. Donut has those same interests. B sucks for different reasons. And I think that keeps it at a level where we are not mocking people's interests or femininity. It is character traits themselves and not interests. And I think that's like a very important element that can kind of distinguish that. Similarly, Carl, I think, is a fantastically written character. I think there are like several pieces of media that tend to fall into kind of two separate opposing sections when we talk about the typical masculine protector role as a character trait. We either kind of get this character who is like super aggressive and overbearing, but anytime characters try to resist, the narrative tells us that super masculine character was right. Like, see, they were always right. You should have listened to them. It doesn't matter how overbearing and aggressive they are. They were right. And because you didn't listen to them, everything went wrong. And now they have to go clean it up. And like, how could you? You should always be listening to them. Or it's like the opposite, where that kind of character now becomes the villain. And it's like, that's never useful to have this protector. How could you be a protector? That's not allowed. That's anti-feminist to be a protector or whatever. And it like falls into this villain category. And these type of characters obviously are usually never allowed to really show emotional vulnerability. Their emotions can only be like in a few boxes. Carl seems to me to exist completely out of this dichotomy in such a great way. Like, he is this typical very masculine man who often takes a protector role and is often, getting people out of trouble. But he's also sometimes pushed back against in that role, but not in a way that is demeaning or diminishing him as a character. I think of this great moment in book 3, the Dungeon Anarchist Cookbook, where Donut kind of confronts Carl about the way he's treating Katia and says, like, you can't just keep forcing Katia to change. Like, that's too much for her. It's not, people don't like to change like that. It's too much. And Carl's kind of like, but look how awesome it is. And Donut's like, yeah, I get it, but you need to ask. You need to give her this free willingness, or that's not the right word, but agency. She needs agency in how you're forcing her to change. And it's such an interesting acknowledgement about how Carl's personality type of get things done could be sometimes overbearing and difficult, but it also isn't turning Carl into the villain, because the narrative also constantly recognizes that Carl is the person who gets things done, and people trust and look to Carl to get them out of tight situations because they know he can. And I love that kind of that thing, like, where characters can push back at those traits without villainizing them, but also bringing up like interesting situations about those character traits. Another thing I love about Carl and his vision of masculinity is that we are kind of in a unique situation in this fictional world where once you were in the dungeon, gender matters much less in terms of physical strength because of obviously like class and race changes. In the typical Dungeons and Dragons way. And so Carl's strength is not only physical, but is often shown through his incredible emotional and intellectual grit. His whole storyline of I will not let them break me, and how he often has to carry the emotional weight for other people of what is happening, and how that is like a super core component of his strength and a recognition of, the typical masculine role in that, I think is really great. And I mean, one of the best scenes, honestly, in the entire series to me that happened in book 5 is when Miriam Dom asks Carl for help. And not only is she the one not only is Carl the one she can trust with this super difficult and horrible task, he's also the one she knows will respond and come. And that's like such an amazing character moment because, they're like kind of friends. There's been friction. But the way people look to Carl for that emotional and intellectual grit, just outside of like his physical role, I think is a super interesting view of masculinity. And on that same note, Carl is allowed a full range of emotions. He has multiple, emotional, vulnerable moments, particularly with Donut, as the series goes on. And that emotional vulnerability is not seen ever as a weakness or played off as that, but actually as one of Carl's strengths, in addition to his other masculine qualities. And I just love that in the way Dinniman writes, emotional strength is not antithetical to masculinity. And I hate to use this word because it's like this buzzword that has lost all meaning. And I think the minute people hear it, their brain shut off and they immediately want to get angry, but just like stick with me. I think this is actually a lot about what we talk about when we talk about toxic masculinity. So often I think that term gets incorrectly applied to somehow mean that what we consider typically masculine traits are somehow bad inherently, or that we don't want them. But instead, I think what toxic masculinity is saying that masculine traits can only be masculine in terms of unfettered aggression, dominance, and stoicism. And Carl's the perfect example that Dinniman has written of this like uber typically masculine character who has grit and emotional strength in so many different ways. And I think I love it. Dinniman's ability to work within character archetypes without falling into stereotypes, I think, are one of the reasons his characters resonate so well and have so much emotional weight. I think in short, it's just that Dinniman writes good characters. That's how you could sum it up. Like, he's just a good writer and he writes good characters, but I like that specific part of it a lot. Okay, those are 3 kind of deeper dive reasons into why I think Dinniman's Dungeon Crawler Carl works so well even as a funny story, that he is able to dig deeper and it doesn't keep at this shallow level that I think a book like this would be so easy to keep at. And I think it's why it's resonated with so many people. I would love your guys' opinions on these 3 things. If you notice them as well, if you disagree, you let me know. Let me know if you were also totally wrecked by that Miriam Dom moment, because it totally wrecked me. Also, this has nothing to do with the video, but the reason I felt immediately the need to write was just like the end Katya scene when she gets the tiara. Absolutely diabolical. Just like completely diabolical. I was so legitimately upset. Anyway, diabolical. This is a great series. Cannot wait to keep reading. Tell me what you like about the series. And as always, if you like these kind of videos, please like and subscribe. That's the best way to support me. And if you want to see what I'm currently reading as well as other nerdy rants, you can check me out on Instagram at bookborn.reviews. Like, for example, if you miss my Wheel of Time takes, which I'm not doing this year, I might do a video at the end. I'm just not doing the comparisons. I'm not doing it anymore. I did just like post my thoughts on episode 1 on my Instagram. So yeah, okay. I'll catch you next time. Bye.